Welcome to the Freight Project podcast, brought to you by Cerasis, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management technology and solutions.
On today's The Freight Project podcast episode, I welcome Cathy Roberson, Managing Director of market research firm Logistics Trends and Insights. As with any first-time guest, you'll get to know Cathy's background as an expert in research and her love of the logistics industry, having worked as a librarian at the start of her career, then on to an e-commerce firm, having a short stint at UPS, and now as a researcher and contributor to many popular industry publications. On the episode, you'll hear a great discussion between Cathy and myself, stemmed from her recent article on drones and what that means for the state of last-mile delivery and how companies are honing in on last-mile delivery practices to deliver upon customer expectations and compete. Cathy will make sure we're all on the same page first by giving the definition of last-mile delivery. Cathy then gets into the heart of why I have her on today, why she thinks shippers are increasing the use of last-mile delivery for surface transportation modes, especially in parcel and LTL, and what are those elements that are driving this market force change. Next, Cathy will answer what she sees as the biggest challenges for shippers as they add in last-mile delivery into the already broad mix of shipping mode responsibility. And finally, Cathy will share what she would offer in the way of solutions or strategic areas of focus so that shippers can make last-mile delivery more efficient. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project podcast. Well, hello, Cathy, and thanks for being on as a valued subject matter expert on the Freight Project podcast. Just for a little bit of our listeners' education, Cathy and I have known each other, around LinkedIn and social media over the past couple of years, and actually had the great pleasure of meeting Cathy in person for the first time at the Parcel Forum last year. I think I'll be able to see her again at the Parcel Forum this year, so that's pretty exciting. But with any first-time guest, we need to get to know who is Cathy. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe your experience in the logistics industry?
Sure. Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting. So a little bit about me. I manage a logistics market research firm called Logistics Trends and Insights, and we do all kinds of projects, from competitive analysis to M&A due diligence. We also work with startups in the logistics space for their content and marketing strategies, and we also do some traditional consulting work. It's a wide variety of what we do, and it's all centered around research and our knowledge of the logistics space. However, I didn't study supply chain in school. My career.
Hey, little secret, Cathy. Neither did I.
I think so many of us fell into this space. We were lucky enough to fall into this space, as a matter of fact.
There you go. Way to think about it. Yep.
My career actually started as a librarian. Yeah. I actually have a master's degree in library science, and I've managed libraries and research departments of libraries in North and South Carolina, as well as here in Georgia. And I also drove the bookmobile for a while also. So, yeah, it's a great conversation starter there. So, But after a while, after I kind of spent a number of years in libraries, I left and I worked at an e-commerce consulting firm, which actually ended up tanking after a year. So, but it was fun. It was a great learning experience. But lucky for me, one of the clients was UPS, and they were kind enough to offer me a position in their new products development group. Okay, this new products development group was tasked with looking at opportunities that did not involve small parcel. So out of that group we created or built up what's today's Supply Chain Solutions, also UPS Capital, and a couple of solutions that the Supply Chain Solutions side still uses today, such as their reverse logistics services. I stayed with Supply Chain Solutions for about 11 years, mostly supporting research and analysis needs And then the final year, I moved into forwarding operations to gain experience in that area. But, research called me back, and I left UPS and worked at a couple of supply chain consulting firms before finally starting my own business. But as part of my own business, I also contribute articles for FreightWaves, Forbes, and just started with the Lodestar as well.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I love those publications. We, push that out through our social media, but it's a great opportunity to really get to know the industry. And I encourage folks to go out there and, gobble up as many resources and different varieties of resources that are out there. Because really, as your career indicates, and your current, company that you have indicate, the freight industry and the supply chain industry really needs folks who understand the data, who understand the research. There's a lot of moving parts in all of freight. It's constantly being disrupted or tried to be disrupted. I think the freight matching apps finally might have a chance. It's taken about a decade to disrupt the freight brokerage world. And I'm sure the cab industry is saying your time's going to come. And the freight brokers have been saying, nah, not yet. But it sounds like it might happen finally with Amazon and Uber.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, it's funny you bring that up because last week I was at FreightWaves conference, the Transparency 19, and I was actually on a panel discussing how to evaluate data, because, not all data is good data. So you've got to determine the good data versus the bad data. And, and then with my marketing background, it's also when you're evaluating rankings, market sizing. So what's the methodology behind all of this? What kind of data is being used and how to evaluate that? So it's all important,
Absolutely. And in that evaluation, especially with your work in the startup space, as you're, covering the industry, getting companies ready to be acquired and, consulting with companies who are looking to acquire certain companies, you really have a really good insight into the bleeding edge of what's happening next in the freight industry. And I think that's what really, drew me today to have you on to really talk about one of the things I know we're focusing on at Cerasis is that last mile. You recently put an article out in FreightWaves kind of talking about drones. Now, again, like the disruption of freight brokers through these freight matching apps, we've seen drones be talked about by many, many people. We've seen the Amazon blimp. We've seen Amazon go after drones. UPS has invested in a few companies. But before we get kind of into that discussion and the state and the possible use of drones in final mile delivery, I always want to make sure that our listeners are on the same page with kind of how you're wanting to frame last mile or final mile delivery. So how would you define final mile or last mile delivery from your perspective?
Okay, so the last mile is actually that. It is the final mile. It's that last part of the supply chain. Well, it's supposed to be the last part of the supply chain where the handoff of the package, of the freight or whatever is given to the customer, whether it's at their front door, left by the garage, in a locker, or at a third-party location, or their next-door neighbor, or what have you. That last mile location keeps changing on a regular basis, but it's really based on the customer's needs. But yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell. I should say.
Well, and it's definitely, I think, a burgeoning opportunity for shippers to compete, and pretty soon, just like 2-day delivery and now 1-day delivery as Amazon and Walmart battle it out for 1-day delivery, Amazon and those kinds of companies like a Walmart or UPS are going to create an expectation that, hey, I'm going to have something delivered to me in a bevy of different ways. Either I get to choose, but it's not up to you to pick. It's going to be my choice. And companies better respond, right? And I think the title of your article really starts getting at that we're getting close. The title was Drones. Are they a viable last mile delivery option? And I'll make sure I put a link to that article, obviously, on this podcast recording page. But first, I want to ask what I think everybody really wants to know. oh, drones again. But after you get over those groans, because I think we've all heard it for a number of years, is it getting close? Are we getting ready for prime time?
Okay, so first of all, I feel like I'm one of the very few people that absolutely adores drones and have always believed in them from the get-go. So I feel like I'm constantly having to take up for the poor drone. But are they ready for prime time? No, they're not. I hate to admit that. They're getting closer. They really are. I think we've moved beyond delivery of burritos and pizzas to actually packages now. So, we've gone past that gimmicky stage of what drones could possibly do to actually delivering blood supplies, in Africa to remote areas, pharmaceuticals, prescription drugs. This is what DHL does. They actually have this as a solution, as a drone delivery type of service to this remote island off the coast of Germany. They use drones to deliver pharmaceuticals and other necessities to people living on this island. And if you also think about the natural disasters that have occurred. The only way you can reach certain, areas is through drones and, drop necessities, care packages and such in those areas. But I think as far as ordering a book, or do people actually read books? Am I the only one left that reads a real book? I'm not sure.
Hey, they're still out there. I think they're making a comeback.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
Hey, what was once old will once again be new, and vice versa till the end of time. So,
okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I wouldn't bank on the ending of books quite yet.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So if I ordered my book from Amazon, it's getting closer of it being delivered by a drone. So in the article I wrote, the FAA issued a license to Google's drone subsidiary to allow deliveries in the southwest section of Virginia. It's a very small area, but still, it's a first step. And that's what I like about this. The FAA is finally taking that first step in allowing, these types of services to begin. It's limited because the delivery has to be done only in the daytime when there's good weather, and the drone can't go beyond, I think, 400 feet in the air. So, but like I said, it's a start.
Even Wilbur Wright had to get up into that plane and make that first launch out of, what was it, somewhere in North Carolina, right? So
yeah.
You got to get to the first step. And you know what? The FAA didn't exist then, but for them to make that kind of designation, even in a small area, it does mean that it's getting closer, and that's good news. Okay,
I think so.
The drones are there, but last mile delivery is not just drones, right? So, let's move over, to the road or surface transportation, an area where Cerasis really focuses on. So why do you think shippers are increasing the use of last mile delivery in surface transportation modes, especially with parcel and LTL? What are the elements driving this market force change?
I think it's the e-commerce, the growth in e-commerce that's driving a lot of this. And when I say e-commerce, I don't necessarily mean just B2C, but I also mean B2B, because there's more business-to-business transactions that are being conducted via the internet now. And I also see the two of these blurring into that. There's really not a distinction, in my opinion, between a B2C and a B2B transaction, because honestly, a lot of business people want that Amazon experience that they have when they purchase personal items, and also large items. More and more of us are purchasing large items online, such as beds, refrigerators, stoves, and so on. And because folks are becoming more accepting of this. They're more comfortable with ordering this type of thing online. And as such, we're seeing more LTL providers entering this space because honestly, UPS and FedEx, they deliver small package, and a bed, a refrigerator, a wash machine, they're not small. And it's difficult for UPS and FedEx's facilities to handle these larger items because the sorting facilities are built for small package.
Right.
And so, there's an opportunity for a lot of LTL providers. And as such, we're seeing a lot more of them entering this space, such as JB Hunt, XPO, Werner, Schneider, and so on. I think almost all of them are in this space now. And there's been a lot of acquisitions as well as for specialized, regional specialized providers and technology providers to build up this capability for each of these LTL providers.
And that's been the biggest driving force for us of change. A couple of years ago, we developed kind of an e-commerce and LTL solution within our TMS so that, these B2B companies who are still shipping freight, but are doing so increasingly online, they needed an option to gain that control in their shopping carts where they could choose to either show the customer the freight cost at the checkout or give the customer the option to choose a different carrier or whatever rules they want to set forth. Those businesses needed that kind of control that the B2C companies were getting on that parcel e-commerce side. Well, what happens after they're getting better at e-commerce? Oh yeah, now that means we don't need to go to the retail shop. I can just go right around that retail shop, right to that customer. But the customer is not going to sit there and go, I'm going to wait for you to figure it out like the retailer did. No, the customer is going to demand that it's pretty good from the get-go. And that's why we're now, developing right along that e-commerce and our traditional, LTL freight shipments within that TMS, that last mile or final mile service, because otherwise we're not able to serve that growing marketplace. And so, as last mile continues to increase in use by shippers, it is going to be a big change for them. I mean, it's hard enough having to deal with market forces such as last year's capacity crunch that really hit full truckload, or, what we've seen over the last 12 months in several general rate increases on the LTL side. And as parcel volumes also increase and the economy's better, and you have to meet new Amazon experience type expectations, that's really tough. So what do you see yourself kind of covering this space intimately as the biggest challenge for shippers as they add that last mile delivery into the already broad mix of shipping mode responsibility?
Well, first of all, the last mile is definitely not like the other parts of the supply chain. And we both know that the supply chain is not this abstract line that has a starting point and an ending point. It's circular. It can be circular. The need to handle reverse logistics is so important. Okay. So you may be delivering that sofa, but oh, by the way, I don't like that color, or there's something wrong.
That wasn't
with
chartreuse.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
yellow.
It just does not match my decor. So take it back. Yeah. So handling that is important. The tracking of the goods. So me as the customer is like, where's my stove? Or, and who do I contact, to find out about where my stove is? Just simply allowing the customer to track and to redirect an item, if necessary, to a locker, the next door neighbor, or deliver at a certain time of day. All of that is very important. The customer really is in the driver's seat here. They're the ones calling the shots. And if you screw up, they'll go to someone else. There's always another competitor, that's waiting to help them. So it's a really highly competitive environment out there. And like I said, it's all part of the customer experience and what differentiates one provider from the next, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, with the rise of e-commerce and last mile delivery and the experience economy that we live in, those unhappy customers are going to be pretty quick to leave reviews. And
Oh,
some of these manufacturers of furniture, that could decimate them. With Casper and some of these online mattress retailers that are popping up, some of their biggest selling points in their commercials even are those reviews. So you got to think that the reason these online retailers like Casper can put a mattress firm out of business and then, to add insult to injury, open up actual brick and mortar stores, I'm sure that's got a sting from Mattress Firm. They've got to be able to deliver on this initial online delivery capability, and it's really key.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've got social media. How powerful social media is. Like you were saying, leaving a review, Twitter. Oh my gosh, I'm known for if I have a bad experience, it goes out on Twitter. And no shame there. I will shame whoever, did me wrong in regards to their delivery or what have you.
It's democratized the shopping experience.
Yes, it has. It has.
I think back in the day, Ford was able to say you can have that in any color as long as it's black. Now, I don't know if that's a true quote, but it fits the narrative we're trying to say here. So, but the reality is Amazon flipped it on its head.
Yes, it has.
And those are the challenges that shippers are facing. But what are some strategic ways of thinking or areas of focus that maybe a shipper can focus on now to really lessen that last mile delivery burden that could happen, to make them more efficient in the last mile delivery area?
Okay, first and foremost, it's the customer. You've got to keep your customer in focus. Remember who you're doing this for. Okay? A good visibility tool for not only the shipper to be tracking, monitoring how things are going, but also a tool that allows the customer to be able to tap into, to track their items, to leave a review of that person that delivered the item. That's important as well. And again, going back to that shipper, you've got to be able to keep your promises. If you say you're going to deliver within a 3 to 4 hour delivery window, please do so. Trust me. I learned the hard way on that one. And communicate regularly with the customer. And there's no such thing as too much communications, but there is a problem with too little communications. If I don't hear from you, if I don't hear from that shipper, I'm assuming everything is okay, but that truck may be about a half a mile to a mile down the road, broken down, and it's going to be delayed, and no one's told me that, and I'm going to be a little upset, So.
And the difference between being, in and out of business,
Exactly.
Frankly.
Yeah.
So if people have options, right? And
yes.
So if you can't keep up, and here's the deal, problems happen, right? We're not saying shipping or delivery on the last mile side is going to be perfect. Even the best LTL shipper that we have at Cerasis is going to have exceptions occur or problems. The key is to be able to own that problem and communicate to that customer, as you said. And that's going to really help bring you across the chasm of change, because this is a big change. Mm-hmm. And a big part of the change in any investment in kind of a strategic initiative like last mile delivery is cost and what to consider. Yeah. Now, each mode has different varying cost levels. Full truckload can cost less than certain shipping modes, but it's going to take longer. LTL has its benefits versus a parcel and vice versa. What are we talking about in terms of logistic cost considerations with last mile?
Your last mile delivery for shippers, the costs are high. It's probably the most expensive part of the total logistics cost. It can average, I have seen as low as 20% of your total logistics cost, all the way up to about 35, if not 40%. So I usually tell my clients, let's just settle on 30%, which is pretty high. And a lot of that is the labor cost, the workers that are actually going out to deliver. And again, going back to all this new technology, the drones, the robots coming up to the front door, That's to help reduce these costs, supposedly, in the long run. But, who's to say? And I think that's why we see so many startups in this space, is to help lower this cost. I mean, it ain't cheap by any means.
No. And I think, the last mile space is going to be pretty hot probably for the next 2 to 3 years. And those shippers who figure it out are going to have a competitive edge. And, a lot of people say, well, Amazon has so much control. And I think what you really have, centered on here is that, sure, they can if you let them. But if you don't actively work towards changing your own business models, maybe disrupting yourself a little bit, and ultimately putting the customer at the heart of everything you do, you have a chance to beat them in certain areas and to focus on experience. Is there any other, piece of advice or maybe forward-looking thing that you can give shippers that you haven't talked about maybe, or what are some other things to consider around last mile?
I think for shippers, they really need to, it sounds corny, but they really need to think outside the box, literally. We've seen like Target actually acquiring a crowdsourced delivery company called Shipped. They did that a couple of years ago, and they're expanding. It sounds like to me that they're actually having some success with this. They're able to offer like 2-day delivery, I believe, in a large chunk of the U.S. Walmart is also utilizing a crowdsource based type of last mile delivery strategy. It's a little bizarre to me, but they're smart. They're very smart there, and I'm sure they know what they're doing. But what they're doing is piecing together. They're utilizing several crowdsource companies such as Postmates, Instacart, and DoorDash, depending on the various parts of the U.S. And they're piecing this together as a last mile option for folks, with the goal of, as we all know, seen today especially, as their next day delivery network that they're building out. But I think their greatest benefit is their stores, their storefronts, because they have, oh my gosh, I forgot. It's like 90% of the U.S. population is within 15 minutes or so of a Walmart, something like that.
Right, it hits that reverse logistics thing.
Exactly,
too, right?
exactly. So they may be able to pull off a crowdsource last mile delivery strategy. I'm not sure, but I'm excited for them, and I'm really I'm pulling for them. So we'll see. But it is that creativity that is needed to build out something like this.
Yeah. Well, think outside the box and put the customer at the center. Don't be afraid to try new things. Seek out technology partners. Seek out people like Cathy and the folks at her firm over at Logistics Trends and Insights for some solid market research on that front, and start really investing in how you're going to compete in the future. Amazon's continuing to do that daily. They do have a lot of cash. So if you're not similarly looking at how you can do that, either collaboratively through partnerships or whatever you need to do, you could be left behind in this growing last mile delivery option way, way before drones still become a viable option. So get with it, right, Cathy?
Right.
Well, hey, Cathy, thank you so much for coming on to the Freight Project podcast and giving us some insights with your coverage and your experience day in and day out in the logistics industry. And can't wait to have you back on in the future. So thanks again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And for all of our listeners out there for the Freight Project podcast, thank you for being a valued listener, and we'll see you on the next one.